Okay, well, it looks like we're live. I have no idea if it's actually working or not. So I can see that apparently I'm on the air and we're live. But at the moment we have no viewers, which is always a positive thing. No one watching us make a mistake in getting this thing up and running. So we might have a pause later. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get Patrick. So Patrick Kelso from Puppet Labs is joining us tonight to talk about. Let's get that started again.
I'm watching.
Yeah, we can see you now. There we are.
Okay, cool. Good. So I'm just going to get the deck started up here on the actual feed so people can see what we're talking about. Okay, great. Okay, so we're now in sync both online and here locally. So usual session format, pizza and beer. You guys have got both of those, so that's good. What's new in Azure since our last meetup, which was back on 18th of March last month? And we've got Patrick Kelso from Puppet Labs tonight who's going to talk to us about a bit of a Puppet 101 and then talk about how Puppet and Azure get along, how we can do automation and many other things on Azure using Puppet. So hopefully we'll be able to get Patrick on the live stream as well, sharing his machine, so we'll be able to get some of that demo goodness down as well. As I said, first time we're doing this, so hopefully the technical gods are with us and we don't have a crash. The reason I've got two machines up here is I tried to do it all on one machine, and running Windows 10 technical preview plus Office 2016 technical preview plus trying to use Google Hangouts to broadcast to the world didn't end well, crashed a few times during the testing. So two separate machines, this one running Windows 8, that one running something that looks like Windows 10 at the moment. Okay, so let's go down to next slide, which is upcoming events. Next Friday, so for the rest of the world it'll be Saturday next week, but we're going to do it on Friday. Disappointingly, the Monday the following week isn't a public holiday, in case your calendar is telling you otherwise, because I was looking at that going, great, 3-day weekend, but unfortunately it's not. So next Friday here in the city, just down the road at Saxon's, the Global Azure Boot Camp is on. If you don't know a great deal about Azure, it's a great way to go ahead and learn about it. You'll need to have your own machine and an Azure subscription, so you can go on to the Azure website and sign up for a 30-day or $210, whichever comes first, type trial. Good way to get your hands dirty with Azure, and you can actually do a fair amount with that $210. For instance, the G series, largest G series VM, switch that baby on, run it with 32 cores and half a terabyte of RAM and 6.5 terabytes of SSD disk, costs you $10 an hour. So you could run it for about 21 hours before you ran out of credit for your trial. Probably mine a few Bitcoins in the meantime if you wanted to have that as a thing to try and achieve. So that's an option. But yeah, if you want to go to the boot camp, you'll need your own machine and your own subscription. After that, on 1st of June, Build, which is the big Microsoft conference happening in San Francisco the last week of this month. Microsoft's going to do some localized mini versions of that. So they'll just do day-long events rather than week-long events. The schedule and who's talking is up on the site already at that URL, sydney.build15.com. Go along and register. You've got to register to attend, but it's free. I think it's going to be held out in North Ryde at the Microsoft offices. I've put my name down. Maybe I'll see you there. There is Ignite, which is the week after Build. Ignite will be in Chicago. So Ignite is an accumulation of all the previous conferences around the Office Service Suite, things like Exchange Server, Met, SharePoint Conference, and Link Conference. They've all been combined into one sort of mega event. As we'll see tonight, there's not a lot of new things that have happened in the last month that are being talked about. That's primarily because a lot of the stuff's being kept in reserve for both Build and Ignite at the beginning of May. Where did I go down? Okay, so preview since March 18, and again, usually these lists are a little bit longer than this, but pretty quiet at the moment. Teams have been busily getting ready for build and ignite, which is good. Azure Site Recovery, so Azure recovery and backup and migration is kind of a big part of what Microsoft's story is around utilising Azure. Obviously, with a local data centre in Australia now, or data centres in Australia, it's kind of a key scenario. How do I get my stuff from my traditional data centre into an Azure environment, and how do I do it with the least amount of friction? Azure Site Recovery, which is based off of a product Microsoft acquired called InMarge, is a big part of that. As well as doing site recovery, it's also a migration tool. There's a thing called the Migration Accelerator, which site recovery utilises the same underlying technology. The idea is a little bit different in that site recovery is protecting instances down in your data center, and in the event of a failure, you can actually fail over to Azure. It does some smart things like allow you to do IP address remapping, so that when a machine comes up in Azure, it'll come up with a different set of IP addresses assigned to it, for instance, so that it doesn't clash with your on-prem network, and you can cool. That's all right. The story around site recovery and the Migration Accelerator is that they're allowing you to bring multiple different workload types into Azure. So they started with Hyper-V on-prem. They've expanded that to VMware, so it's actually down at the hypervisor layer, so it's doing proper full VM moves rather than actually having to move bits of the VM about. And they're doing physical machine support as well, so they're going quite low level. Hyper-V have already got that capability. They've just introduced VMware as in previous service. With the Migration Accelerator, you can actually do that with AWS workloads as well, so you can go in and take EC2 instances and transport them across to Azure. So that's a big part of what we're seeing, certainly at cloud from a migration standpoint. And then the other big one, and there was a lot of hoo-ha about this back just after we had the last meetup. So I think it was the day after the last meetup. Scott Guthrie is going to get up and talk about something that's going to change developers' lives, and eventually the announcement was the Azure App Service, which is basically a rebrand of websites and mobile services to make them what are called web apps and mobile apps, and the introduction of two new concepts, which is the Logic app and the API app. And the idea is kind of driving towards that integrated microservice, and I use that term loosely, microservice strategy in Azure, where you can start to use different building blocks to deliver an overall functional capability. So you could say, for instance, accept some data using a web app on a REST API inbound, use an orchestration to pull it into a Logic app and do some processing on it, write it out into a database, and then use a mobile app to surface that stuff back out into mobile devices in the field that you potentially have. I know some of the guys at Cloud have been looking at it. I think it's very early days on that, but it's an interesting strategy from Microsoft and kind of a bit of a different direction to where AWS is going. Some similarities with Google Cloud, but Microsoft's really showing their developer chops there. They're really focusing on this from a developer standpoint rather than a sort of a pure infrastructure play. So I expect to see a lot more in that space. And even within, I think, the week of that launching, the media services team provided what's called a connector. So you can actually ingest workloads and push it straight out into media services using this new app service. So we'll see where that goes. It's an interesting one, but very early days. I think, personally, I think there was probably a little bit too much build-up to that announcement. I think the announcement was a bit underwhelming. We'll see, though, what the plans are for that. Maybe we'll see some big stuff around that at Ignite Build in a couple of weeks. So general availability, a bit of a longer list here. First one's actually a really interesting one, and it's a conundrum that stumps a lot of people when they move to the cloud, because on-prem you've always really had the capability, if you've got the time and the money and the software, to do those low-level VM snapshots at the hypervisor layer. So you can do consistent state VM snapshots, put them off to one side, and you can always restore that consistent state. In the cloud, you haven't really had that capability on any cloud platform. It's always been a inconsistent state snapshot, where you take a snapshot of the machine at a point in time and it may or may not have application state consistent, or you've got to shut the machine down, then snapshot it, and then bring the machine back up. or you use the traditional backup approach of an agent running on the machine that will take bits of the machine and save them somewhere else for you. With this consistent state full VM backup, in Azure now you can actually take a running VM and you can snapshot it and the state will be guaranteed to be consistent. And that will be put into a backup vault like the existing backup solution they have, which is agent-based backup. And they're the first to do that in any cloud. Doesn't impact performance, machine can be left in the running state. It's all done effectively behind the scenes. So if you run a data center, it would be like running your own private backup network. They've done that up in Azure, which is great. That's an interesting one. Big limitation for it at the moment is maximum 30-day retention period for any VM snapshot, which won't fly in a lot of larger organizations where they probably need a much longer window than that. Backup service generally supports up to 99 years. But there's obviously, I guess, some constraints around storage space per account once you start snapshotting full VMs, which may consist of anything up to 17 or 18 terabytes of storage, depending on how many disks you have attached to it. So a much different proposition on that front. Because of that change and the Azure site recovery, as of first debate, they made some pricing changes to the backup service to bring the price down and to move some of the costs that were consumption unit based before into a much more fixed price model where you pay a certain dollar fee per protected instance that you're running these services against, and then you pay a small incremental fee for the amount of bulk storage that you're using, and some of those underlying transaction costs go away. So at the lower end, if you're doing very small sets of backups and protected instances, you're not really seeing much of a change with the new pricing scheme. But if you're doing a large volume of protections in your environment, then you'll actually see quite a cost saving. I think it's something up to 77% cheaper at the very high end of the scale, which is great. So not just a technical change, but a pricing change there as well. Big bugbear in Azure is maximum disk size space of 1 terabyte. It's still there. What's changed though this month is that now the OS disk, which traditionally was limited to 127 gigabytes by default, can now also be up to 1 terabyte. Microsoft still recommends that you don't store information down on that OS disk. Certainly don't store it on the temporary or ephemeral disk that's attached to the instance. But you now have an option if you have maybe some legacy applications that have to install on the C drive and they have to store instance data on the C drive, you now have that option with a little bit more space to move. Still limited to 1 terabyte though, whichever way you look at it. DocumentDB, which is Microsoft's NoSQL JSON-based schema database, also went GA. It's been in preview for probably the last 4 or 5 months. So at GA, they announced more sizes to actually use. So you've got larger storage spaces and more performance tiers. And they've also made it available in more Azure regions. So before it was in only a limited number of regions, it's now available in all. I don't know if it's available yet in Australia, but it's worth looking at if you're looking for a native NoSQL solution in that space and you're prepared to invest the time with DocumentDB. API management. So Azure API management is probably one of the teams that's hitting a really regular cadence in terms of new releases and changes. Dropping new changes probably every 6 or so weeks, and they've done it regularly since they went GA last year. They announced premium tier preview earlier in this year. What they've done is they've now rolled that over into GA, so that just means that it's back with an SLA and performance metrics that they must meet each month in availability. The big thing with premium tier is that you've got the ability to connect a API management proxy back to an internal API that you're running on-prem. So it's a great way to monetize and/or securely expose internal REST APIs to the outside world if you want to do it that way. And then the final one, media services. So I was talking to some of the guys about this before. There's actually a big conference going on in North America at the moment around broadcasting technology. The media services team were presenting at that. A big part of what they've done there is they're I think they're the first cloud provider doing media services that have certification from North American broadcasters as a video on demand service. They've got some better capabilities around supporting live streaming and doing content indexing for large volumes of video data that's been uploaded into the cloud, including now doing Spanish language support, which is pretty much a no-brainer for North America, where if you don't speak English, you definitely speak Spanish. So that's generally available. So we're almost there. So announcements. Yeah. So kind of an adjunct to Azure at its core, but Microsoft announced this thing called ExpressRoute for Office 365. Anybody here know, or does anyone here not know what ExpressRoute is? So ExpressRoute, who knows what AWS Direct Connect is? Okay, so basically if you're a large enough organization and you have a traditional on-prem data center, or a traditional data center that maybe even is co-located, and you want to create a hybrid private cloud network that connects your data center directly into the environment or environments you're building in Azure, you can go out and you can purchase what's called ExpressRoute. So it's a combination of dedicated gateway compute in Azure, and then physical cross-connect into a circuit from a provider. So in Australia, you've got Telstra do wide area network MPLS ExpressRoute support, or you have Equinix who do physical cross connections in the exchange. So if you're co-located in Equinix, you can use that. You also have Cloud Exchange, which is an Equinix offering if you're not on Telstra, and NextDC will also be offering ExpressRoute soon. That provides you with a private channel between your private IP range and your Azure private IP range, and also provides potentially a secured private route between your private network and the Azure public APIs. So you have two channels. You don't have to use both of them when you connect, but if you want to route all the traffic between your private network and the Azure public APIs over a controlled endpoint that maybe you put a firewall in so you can do packet inspection, then you can use that by advertising BGP routes between your router and Azure public endpoints, and all the traffic will route over that. ExpressRoute for Office 365, I think, will probably just be another one of those peers. So you'll be able to use Office 365 Cross Connect, I suspect, by advertising BGP routes out your gateway to Office 365. We'll have to wait and see on that. There's a FAQ up online. I seem to recall it said that if you've got ExpressRoute already, this will be a service offering that you'll be able to flick a switch and have it turned on. It does require physical connection though. That's usually what takes the time, getting your partner to actually set it up. Actually configuring in Azure is just running a PowerShell command to get a shared key that gives you service provider to configure their routing equipment to connect into Azure. So, excuse me. The second one, a pen blog. This one hasn't really had any noise around it. It sort of snuck out yesterday. And I think it's probably the start of CloudTrail or equivalent in Azure. So a great place to put your auditing and operations logs, which is an immutable blob that once a block gets written, it can't be deleted, obviously, unless you delete the entire thing. But the concept is that the blob is highly optimized for massive amounts of concurrent writes, can support concurrent writes from many different locations, and the only way it can be written to is by appending blocks to the end of the blob, which is very different to the blob types that exist in Azure Blob Storage today. These are announcements. These don't have a timeline to when they will drop exactly, but Microsoft has come out and said these are coming and they're committing to them. Generally, you won't hear or see these sorts of things before Microsoft is pretty sure they're going to make them happen. A lot of these sorts of things would typically be covered under an NDA and wouldn't be discussed unless you are a part of the private preview program with Microsoft. And then again, probably an aside to Azure, but interesting because this will eventually surface inside of Azure, I would expect, is as part of Windows Server v Next, you're going to actually have not just Docker container support, but you'll have what Microsoft's calling Hyper-V container support. They've been working very closely with the Docker team and the Docker community to effectively make these things interoperable. So the container service that we'll eventually see in Azure, I would expect, will probably be driven by a lot of the work that's being done to deliver that container service inside of Server vNext. And then the concept of nano server, which is, if you've used Server Core before in Hyper-V, it's literally just an even smaller version of Server Core, where you can literally run a very minute footprint as your hypervisor, and then you can choose to add and remove components as you want. So you no longer need to install this sort of mega server to run in your environment. You can pick and choose and maybe run Server Core with an IIS module running on top of it. So we'll see where that goes. I haven't played with the preview of that. That's preview is available if you're part of the Connect program. You can download it and install it. I don't know whether it's running nano server or Hyper-V containers just yet, but they're talking about it now publicly in the last couple of weeks. Okay, so I've talked enough, I think.
Last question, just before we move on.
Yep.
With regards to the ASR and backup, do you know of any sort of a combination? I read somewhere in a magazine, the Reboot magazine, about where you can, there's a service for both combined. Tell me about that.
So ASR is based on InMarge, and you've got, so ASR gives you a bunch of different things around on-prem to Azure and on-prem to on-prem.
Yeah.
And then you've got, I don't think you have Azure on-prem just yet.
No, I mean, I'm familiar with the, it's more just the, like, there was, what I read in this article is that if you're using ASR and, you know, you've got per instance charge, you can also use, there was sort of one where it combined that with backup as well. So you're doing on-prem to Azure backup.
Yeah, so Azure Site Recovery and Backup, the backup service is, I think it's another one of those cases where, I'm just going to stop sharing this, sorry, 2 seconds. I think it's another case of with Azure where you've got multiple services that kind of do similar sorts of things, and it's not always easy to determine which one's which. Backup is primarily an agent-based backup approach where you install the backup agent down on the Windows server on-prem and back up to a backup vault that you configure inside of Azure. The only thing I can think they're talking about is the VM, running VM snapshot, which also uses backup vaults. But it's not Azure Site Recovery. Azure Site.
It seemed to sort of suggest it was two different services, but if you went with them both, it was almost like it was treated as one in terms of from a pricing perspective.
Potentially, there is some combinations of those services where they kind of fall under the same service category.
Yeah.
I'd have to look at that. If you can send me, if you can send me the link to that online article, I'll certainly take a look. It's always hard to tell. Like I said, there are a few instances inside of the Azure world where things are similar and do similar sorts of things, and they charge slightly differently and are aimed at slightly different segments. That might be one of them. How are we doing? Do we connect okay?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if you can make me a presenter.
Yep.
Before I start, do any of you fine gentlemen wearing glasses have your microfiber cloth with you? Because I've just touched my wings and I can't see anything from my right eye. No? Okay, I'll scratch. Oh, brilliant. Here we are. Crowd, full service consultancy.
All right. So why can't I make you? All right, we're just going to try and get Patrick up here as a presenter.
Other than the Azure announcement, have you seen much about the containers? Not the Docker container stuff. Have you heard much about them at all?
Only what's publicly available at this point. Yeah, so I guess from our standpoint, it's not being very friendly. How can I add you?
It sounds like there's just going to be 7 nano containers, the VMs running above. That's what it sounds like.
Sorry, we're just trying to sort this out.
Don't make us multitask.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm a man. I can't multitask.
Shakes them before it puts them
Yeah. Okay, it's really weird watching a like 15-second delay on my head on the screen. Where did my hair go? It was there yesterday.
You're not the guy in the picture either.
No, I can't actually add you to.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, this is a PEBCAC moment. This is not a technology fail. This is me not.
So you know how we have to have really complex long passwords and use password safe and all of that crap? This is why I can't just log in on his computer and do my demo, because I don't know my passwords. And they're all 64 characters long, and I'm not going to type them in. We'll be here all day.
We lost a viewer. They've decided that they're going to flip the bozo bit on us.
I think they were in this room probably.
Yeah.
They stopped.
So I can invite you, but why don't you get the invite? It's weird.
That's the second one. Yeah, there we go. The top hat.
Oh, well.
Yeah. The first one was also me, but it's
Yeah.
another me. So
Just add you.
do a loud invite. It tells me I haven't responded, but it hasn't given me the invite. Oh, Sydney is yours. Sydney sent me a message.
Okay, that's good.
Let's start. Okay.
All right.
Now,
There we are.
how do I share my desktop?
All right, here we are.
Anyone motion sick?
Okay.
Okay.
This.
Ready? Right.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Patrick. Right.
I'm Patrick. I work for Puppet Labs. I've been there for about a year now. I'm a solution architect, sales engineer, where many hats, including a fine-grade Puppet. How many people here know what Puppet is or what Puppet does? Oh, that's much better than earlier when this table was just like that.
How many people are using Puppet currently? Shame on you. How many people are using something like Puppet?
That's even worse.
No, it's better. You're better off using something than nothing. I'd prefer you use Puppet though, it's the best. What I'm going to be showing today is I'll do a quick overview of Puppet for the 80% of you that don't know what Puppet is. And then I'll show you some of the things we're doing with Azure to make it easier for Azure users to take advantage of Puppet Enterprise without actually having to know an awful lot about how to manage a Linux system or get Puppet Enterprise up and running in the first place. So we actually have an appliance in the marketplace on Azure that you can just install and set up and use. And there's a couple of pitfalls which I'll come to later as well. First up, I just want to show this. So Microsoft OpenTech have been quite heavily involved with Puppet for the past year and a bit. Last year at the Microsoft Build Conference in San Fran, thank you. Luke Canese, my CEO, actually was one of the keynote speakers. It's the first time ever that a non-Microsoft person was a keynote speaker on day one of the Build Conference. So they've seen what Puppet can do, and they're very excited about the possibilities. They also, obviously,
work with a lot of other technologies, but we're still the only one that have an appliance in their infrastructure. And we have this module which they've written and they've provided to us for us to provide to our community, which allows you to provision Azure stuff using Puppet. I'm not going to demo this because I forgot about this and didn't do it with Puppet. And we've got a couple of pages on their OpenTech page about Puppet and various things you can do with it as well, which is a good place to start for information on doing it in Azure. Now, so this is Puppet Enterprise. This is the console you see when you log in to get a view of your world of your computers. So Puppet is a configuration management tool. It's used for software automation, for ensuring compliance of systems, and applying a desired state to a system and ensuring that the system always matches that desired state, or a report is sent back when you know that it's not. So the status updates you can see there, there's a fair few different fields. Unresponsive. This demo I'm doing right now goes off my laptop, so they're all just turned off because otherwise my laptop overheats. Quality hardware. Failed means something has failed in a Puppet run. Unlike a PowerShell script or a Bash script on Linux, Puppet won't necessarily fail completely if a failure happens. It will do things it can still do that don't depend on the thing that failed, but it won't do anything that has a dependency. So failed might have 50 things to manage in Puppet, and if it's failed, then it'll be 1 or 2 things that have actually failed. Vanilla is a simulation mode. So this is actually a very useful tool to be able to find out what your proposed change is actually going to do. Before I joined Puppet, I worked in ITIL enterprises for 10, 15 years. I went to an awful lot of CAB meetings, and I'd go to the CAB meeting and they'd say, what are you going to do? And I'd go, I'm going to upgrade the package. And they'd say, what's that going to do? And I'd go, well, it's going to put the new version there. And they go, why are you doing it? Because I have to. It's a security patch. And they go, what's it going to do? And I go, I don't know. Most of the time, you don't actually know what's going to change. You don't know what things you're going to be making changes to your system. So you might install one package, there might be dependencies that need to be pulled in. You don't know necessarily if the system's going to require a reboot when you install the package or not. And this happens on Linux as well as Windows. So by doing the simulation mode, you can get more of an idea of what's actually going to change. And what I do now, or what I did when I was using Puppet before I joined Puppet, was I would print out the simulation and I would take it to the CAB meeting and I'd go, here you go, that's what I'm doing. And they can't argue with that because it's exactly what's going to happen. Changed and unchanged, fairly self-explanatory. Something changed, nothing changed. Unreported is not really important. It's when you've signed a certificate, you've set up a new client, but it's never done a Puppet run. So this will pop up every now and then, but within half an hour a Puppet run will happen, and it will carry on using Puppet. And then you get a longitudinal view here. This should look really cool and cover 30 days, but because of my laptop, it doesn't. And then you get more information about the actual systems that are running here. So we can see that my Windows systems here had some changes, my Ubuntu systems have had some changes. There's been quite a few changes across my systems over the past, however long these will go for. Let's call it a week. Since I last reverted to a snapshot on my VM. This is all built around role-based access control, which can hook into Active Directory. So you can hook it in, do your authorization and authentication to Active Directory. All users from Active Directory can be given roles, and then they can log in, they can view their servers, they can't view someone else's servers. So you can granularly lock down who can do what to what systems. And to classify a system, we have a rules-based classifier. So every time a Puppet agent runs, I always do this backwards. I've been doing this demo for a year, and I still do this in the wrong order every single time. When a Puppet agent runs, actually let's grab a Windows box. It runs a tool called Factor, and Factor is a program that generates facts about an operating system. So Factor runs every single time Puppet runs, and it generates a database of key value pairs of facts about the system. What operating system is installed, what the major version is, what the minor version is, what the kernel version is, how much RAM there is, what the IPs are, how much disk space. If it's in Amazon, it grabs the EC2 metadata. If it's in Azure, it grabs Azure metadata. All of this information is then presented back to the Puppet master and can be used programmatically to modify your systems or to make changes. So some common examples of useful ones. You can create your own custom ones. So I have one called Data Center, which doesn't work on my Windows machine. I should check that. you quite often have ones that tell the location of the system. We can see the domain of my system, so you can see that this class booted up when I was at home and it picked up my home private domain. And then you've got the fully qualified domain, whether or not it's 64-bit. All this information is available to programmatically configure systems, and also you can use it back in the configuration. So, for example, you can tell a service to listen on this IP address. And if you have multiple interfaces, you could say listen only on the IP address on interface 2, not the IP address on interface 1, as an example. So every time they run, they send the facts back to the master. The master uses the facts to classify the system. So I've got a group here called Windows Servers. At the moment, it doesn't have any facts in it. This UI is not designed to be such a low resolution screen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to set a fact on the kernel, and I'm going to set it to Windows. And then I'm going to discard that, and I'm going to set it to lowercase windows. There we go. And I'm going to commit that change so it goes into the database. And now I have a matching system, which is my Windows Server 2008 R2 A box. I've got another VM over here, which is Windows Server 2008 R2 B. This works just as well on 2012, which is 2012 requires more memory. So I'm running 2008 because it's, again, laptop. And I'm going to do a Puppet run. Now, you don't have to keep these on manually. I'm not going to do a Puppet run because I forgot to install Puppet. For those of you that weren't here at the start, I was in Perth last night presenting in the Meetup. I was up until about 1 AM drinking with the people from the Meetup, and then I flew back to Sydney. It's been a long day. While I'm getting that booting, I'm going to jump over to Azure. That's what we're here for. I'm going to shut this one down. I love when a demo goes off about it. So this Puppet Master here is actually my Azure Puppet Master that I built up earlier today. So it looks exactly the same. It's running the same version of the code. It's just a pre-built application, so it's much easier for you to get started with. You don't have to understand how to untar a tarball on a Unix system if that's not your thing. So when you want to create a new one, you just go to Azure, you tell it you want a virtual machine, pick from the gallery, search for Puppet. Now there are two here. There's this old deprecated one and there's this new one. Getting an image into the gallery is difficult. Getting an image out of the gallery is even more difficult. I don't know why, they just won't let us delete it. So we have all these people running incredibly old code, ringing up and your Puppet product is crap. We go, what version are you running? Oh, it's 2 years old. So this is the newest version. It supports Server 2012, it supports SQL Server 2014. It's much more useful in Azure. So you have to give the server a name. I always recommend going for an A3, 4 cores, 7 gigs of RAM. Set a username. Now this is a Unix system, so you can either set a password, you can log in with a password, or you can use an SSL shared certificate, which is what I'm going to do. So remember where it is. There we go. And then do the usual, go through all this, tell it where you want it to be. And then you have to set up the endpoints to allow Azure to go through. At a minimum, you'll need HTTPS. You'll need the Puppet port, which is not pre-listed, which is a bit of a shame. This is all documented. There's a PDF that I will send on to the Meetup group, so you'll all get this. And there's another program called mcorrective, which is 61613. and then click go. Now this will take about 10 minutes. It has to stand up a Linux VM. It then runs a bootstrap script to install Puppet Enterprise. It runs with a set of defaults that we found to be pretty reliable. And in the end, you'll have to log into the Linux machine to recover the password for the Enterprise console, because unfortunately we haven't worked out a good way of presenting that back at this time. We're still working on that. We've had a few options kicking around, and we're hoping to get something fairly soon where it'll be a lot easier to do. And that's going to take a while, so I'm not going to use this one for the demo, because we'll have to wait 10 minutes. When you want to create another machine, just a normal Linux machine or a Windows machine, so let's just go, let's not quick create. Let's do choose an image. I'm going to do Windows Server Data Center.
I'm not going to have a nice one feed because I didn't mute my.
Set up username, password. Set up anything you need to set up here. Oh, imagine that. And then at the end, there's this option to install Puppet Enterprise 80. And then you can tell it what your Puppet master is. And you can install antivirus if you want as well at this point, which is quite handy. And then you hit submit, and that'll start spinning up the machine, and it'll automatically install the Puppet engine, and the Puppet engine will go out and open the blast and go, hello, here I am, because the signing request, sign with the business together. Now, I reckon my A server is up and running again. There we go. So if I go back to Puppet, I've got my Windows servers, I've got my Windows server there, and then I assign classes of code to the system. So this is, does anyone here do automation with PowerShell? A bit? Few. A lot of the Puppet stuff works with PowerShell. We have a PowerShell provider, so you can just put a PowerShell command in, tell Puppet to run it in PowerShell, and it'll execute in PowerShell. We take advantage of built-in Windows management tools. So if we're adding and removing programs, we use WMIC. I think. I'm not a Windows guy, so if I get it mixed up, that's why. If we're working with updates, we use the update service. We use Microsoft services. We try and do things the native way. And the idea of Puppet is you don't need to understand how to do the native way yourself to get it to work with Puppet. So when you're on a Linux system or a Windows system, if you want to add a user, it's exactly the same in Puppet. You don't have to say, oh, I'm doing it on Windows, so it has to be done this way. You just go, user, Bob, add, and it goes and does it, which is really, really handy. More handy when you're working with Unix systems and you've got 15 different types of operating systems and they all have different tools for managing users. So I have code here that's installed that installs an application, a CMS application, which is a .NET application, which requires IIS, and I've got a baseline configuration. So I'll show you some of this code in a moment. And all of these, and Chocolatey for installing packages. If you're not using Chocolatey and you need to install packages, try Chocolatey, you'll be amazed. We liked Chocolatey so much that we hired the guy that invented it. So he's now getting paid by Puppet Labs to continue developing Chocolatey for Windows.
Windows 10 and Windows Server next actually using package manager very similar to Chocolatey.
Yes.
Natively. So you'll be having that capability natively in Windows next native releases. But if you've got Chocolatey,
yeah, that'll be interesting. I knew it was coming, but I don't have a lot of faith that the first implementation will be what everyone expects.
well, you guys hired the guy that wrote Chocolatey. So
yeah. Okay, so on my Windows system, typically most systems administrators that I know, when they want to set up a system, they want to add a role to a system. They come in here and they go add roles. They click next, they tick the roles they want, and then they click next, and they might tick some more boxes, and then they click install, and then they sit there and there's an hourglass. If you're using PowerShell, good for you. but only about 5 of you put your hands up, so the rest of you are doing this. Puppet just uses PowerShell and just does it. So it just runs through and bang, all of the stuff is there pretty much straight away. The only time it slows down is if it's downloading packages. And because we use Chocolatey, Chocolatey downloads from the internet by default, but you can have an internal Chocolatey server as well. ANZ Bank use Puppet and Chocolatey. There's a video on YouTube, you can search for it. They did a presentation last year about it. They have their own Chocolatey server internally, and they push all of their applications by putting them on the Chocolatey server, and then Puppet installs them from the Chocolatey server onto the Windows systems. And they find that's faster and more reliable than any other method they tried. And now we're going to look at some code. How many people here are coders? Well, that's the most hands I've seen all night. That's good. I'm not a coder. I'll just wave that flag right now. I'm a terrible coder. Puppet does have a GUI IDE that you can use. It's based on Eclipse. It works on any operating system because it's Eclipse, so it runs in Java. It can connect automatically to a Subversion or a Git server, and you can push your code there. I mean, you can edit Puppet in Notepad if you want, but our editor, which is called Geppetto because it makes puppets, is much better. I'm a Unix admin, so I use VI. I don't actually know how to use our editor, so I'm not going to because it'd be embarrassing. So,
So can I just confirm you running the Windows logger here?
at the moment, yes.
Okay. Just for demo purposes, because you're using Vagrant there.
Yeah, just for demo purposes, purely because I do this demo all the time, and normally places don't let me use their Wi-Fi.
Okay.
So I plan to be offline, and then if I'm not, hooray. So I am spinning stuff up in Azure, but it takes so long to do. So here's one I prepared earlier. So Puppet code. Can everyone read that? I'm going to buy you guys a lectern for Christmas.
I stole it for the broadcast.
Yeah. Puppet has a concept of environments, which is roughly translates to your development environments if you're a development shop. So, you know, dev, test, prod, that type of thing. But you can build your own environments really quickly because it's just a folder on disk. It's got Puppet code in it. So you can create new environments to test something. And then when you're finished, you just merge your code back into the main trunk of the dev environment and then push it through. I do all my stuff in production because I like to live on the bleeding edge. And I've got snapshots and I roll back every night. So the way Puppet code works is you write a manifest. It's a declarative language that is fairly straightforward. By default, it goes top to bottom like a script, but you can put resource ordering in yourself and tell it what the order of something has to be. You can write classes of code and you can call classes from other classes. So it's kind of object-orientated, but any real program will go, that's not object-orientated. I did like 2 Java courses at uni. It looks like object-orientated as far as I'm concerned. It's got classes, that's objects, right? So what people typically do is you write a module, which is a Puppet code to manage something. So IIS, Apache, Windows, NTFS, ACLs. That's one individual module. And it might have 5 or 6 classes of code in it. It might have 3 or 4 files. And then when you want to use it, you just substantiate that class. So you just basically call the class and say, run this code. It's not a scripting language. If you run it expecting it to act like a script, you'll be disappointed and it won't work. So I've got lots of modules on my system. And if we have a look at my profiles, so we tend to work in a paradigm we call roles and profiles, where you create a profile which is Puppet code that manages something. So your profile might call a module that manages IIS, and you might have a profile that is IIS, and it specifies how you want IIS to look. So I've got one here, amazingly enough, called IIS. And what it does is, first of all, it includes another class of code to install .NET, because that's a requirement. It then makes sure it sets a default for DISM. DISM is a Windows management tool for adding roles and features. So it's pretty handy to use and a lot faster than clicking through next, next, next. It then checks the kernel major version of the operating system. So in this case, it's looking, it says 6.1, that's grand, it's Windows 2008, I'm going to install all of these. If it was higher and it was Windows 2012, it would install a different set of things because IIS has a different set of features that you need to enable. If it was lower, we'd say, sorry, we don't support that anymore, please upgrade, and Microsoft will tell you the same thing. And then we basically just specify a list of all of the things we want on the system. There's nothing complex in this code. It's just a list of things I want installed on my system, and they're all the IIS things I want. And then at the bottom, after it installs all of those, it runs an external script, exec register with IIS. And what that does is it runs the ASP.NET Reg IIS program to register.NET with IIS so you can run a .NET application in IIS. This took me a long time to get working properly because I'm not a Windows guy. I assumed once I'd installed .NET that it was registered with IIS. My mistake. So once it does that, it then sets up, it removes the default website. So ensure absent. Most of the commands in Puppet are key value pairs. It's not a difficult language to get started with. You can do some funky stuff, but to get started, and for most of what people want, you just declare what you want. And it removes the default app pool. And that's all this code does here. If we have a look at my baseline code, all it does is requires that I have the registry module installed, contains Chocolatey. So require and contain are programming terms. They mean two different things, and I've completely forgotten what the difference is. So moving on. Reboot. Puppet's been around since 2005. We basically haven't had to support reboots until we started supporting Windows. Sad but true. We now support reboots on most operating systems. So you can do kernel patching on Linux using Puppet because we support reboots. So what this means is, I mean, any program can just type reboot and reboot a system. What this actually does is it will reboot the Windows machine when there's a pending reboot. So sometimes when you do an install and it says you have to reboot to complete the install and you go no, and then you try and install something else and it goes, oh no, there's a pending reboot, you can't do anything. Puppet looks for that pending reboot. When it sees it, it reboots the system. The system comes back up, the Puppet run starts again. It tells Windows to run Puppet as soon as it boots, and it picks up where it left off. So your Puppet run doesn't, like if you had a script that ran and then your system rebooted, your script would error and you wouldn't complete the end of the script. Whereas with Puppet, when the system reboots, it just picks up where it left off and completes the job that it needs to do. So it installs Chocolatey. It then installs a few default applications that I like to have on Windows. A better browser, a better text editor, a better zip file, and source control. And all of these are I don't use them most of the time in my demo, but they're useful to have. So these are my defaults. At home, I've got defaults that do exactly the same thing in my lab. Whenever I spin up a Windows machine, it installs Firefox on it straight away. Just so I don't have to open Internet Explorer and then go, no, I don't want to customize my settings, and no, I don't want to change my browser. It's just faster. So we can see here now that my three machines are up and running. And if I go back to Firefox and I reload this page, I now have a node request. So as I mentioned, when a node is installed, it generates a CSR for an OpenSSL certificate. It sends the CSR to the Puppet master. When the Puppet master gets the certificate, it can either put it in this queue and wait for me to come along and approve it, or I can set up a programmatic endpoint that will sign it based on rules. I haven't done it with Azure, but on a certain other large cloud hosting provider, I've set it up so that it will automatically log into my account and verify that the certificate belongs to a server that's in my account. If someone can already spin up a VM in my account, I've got bigger problems than whether or not they can sign a certificate on my Puppet master. You can also do things like a lookup against the CMDB or a lookup against anything with an API, basically. All the script has to return is 0 or 1. If it returns 0, it is signed. If it returns 1, that's non-standard, and it doesn't sign the certificate. And it'll go in this queue, and you just wait. So I sign that certificate, and in a little while, sometime atomically in the next half an hour, Puppet will run on that system, and it'll all work, and everything will go through. And we'll start to see over here what I mentioned before, the unreported. The certificate is signed, but the node has not actually run a report because it's never done anything. So, in a week's time, we're releasing a new version of Puppet, which has got some new features that mean you will have to do even less stuff in Linux. You'll be able to work entirely from a Windows machine, push code to a version control system, and then that code will magically appear on your Puppet master and get applied to your systems. And you'll never need to log into the Linux VM that we're running on Azure. So of course I did the demonstration this week, so I can't show you. I will come back at some point and show that because it's really awesome when it all ties together and it just works. At the moment, there are things you do have to do to configure the system that involve logging into a Unix box. So if we have a look at our Forge website, and we find a module that we want to install. So with Puppet Enterprise, we have supported modules, which are modules written by Puppet Labs that we support. And if you have a problem and you're using Puppet Enterprise, you can email us or call us if it's an emergency, and we'll talk you through what you need to do. We also have Puppet Approved modules. Now, the Puppet Approved modules are modules that are made by members of our community. Probably half of the 50 modules up there are made by members of our staff in their spare time. These are modules that have user acceptance tests. They've got well-written server aspect tests. The code itself has been audited and there's no nasty things happening. So these are all good modules to look at. So if we have a look for any on Windows, because we may as well show a Windows module. So open tables, Windows feature module. So to install a module on a server, you have to run this command. Puppet module install, and then the name of the module you want to install. I'm still on my Puppet master. This is my Puppet master that I spun up before, PSK-Puppet. It's this one that I spun up before I got here. And if I just run Puppet module install, this will install the module and it will install any dependencies. So it's pretty easy to do. While it's doing that, I'll show you one last module. What's the time? Excellent. This is a couple of examples of more complex, but still incredibly simple code. This is a module for managing OpenSSH. Yep, so we can see this installed, Windows feature, PowerShell, and standard lib. They were all dependencies that installed them for me. So now I can assign this code to my server and I can actually do stuff with it. But I was showing you this. So this is a class for managing OpenSSH on a Linux machine. This is a demonstration class. This is not a class I recommend any organization uses. This is purely for demonstration purposes. It uses a case statement, which is standard case statement based on one of the facts about the system of the OS family. OS family is most important on Linux because you've got lots of different distributions and they're all ever so slightly different, just enough to be really annoying. So you've got Red Hat and Debian, you've got SUSE Linux, you've got a bunch of different Red Hat compatible ones like Oracle Enterprise Linux and Azure. I think they use SUSE, don't they? CentOS. They use CentOS, and there's heaps of them. It can get very frustrating. And I'm a Unix guy and I get frustrated by it. So what I've got here is a case statement based on the OS family, and it includes a different class of code as long as it's valid. And if it doesn't work, it does a notify, which just sends a message back in the log saying, I'm sorry, this operating system's not supported. So if I run this on a SUSE Linux box, it's going to come back and fail because it's not supported. Then if we look at my Debian code here, and before anyone, whoops, that wasn't what I meant to do. Here we go. I mentioned before that Puppet by default runs from top to bottom. So it logs in, it looks at the code, it evaluates all of the instructions in the code, and then if there are no instructions, it runs top to bottom. In this code, when it starts looking at the code, first it looks at this one, the file. There's no requirements here. It doesn't depend on anything else, so that's fine. It could run there if nothing else depends on it coming afterwards. Then there's the service for the SSH daemon that has to run. We have to ensure it's running. We have to ensure it's enabled. And it is subscribed to this file, the SSHD config file. What the subscription does is anytime Puppet changes that file, the service will be notified that it needs to reload its configuration, which is a really, really nifty thing. And then after that, there's the package. And the package is called OpenSSH Server. It has to be installed. I don't have to care how Red Hat installs, or sorry, Debian. This is a Debian box. I don't have to care how Debian installs a package. I know, but I don't have to. If this was Red Hat or SUSE, it doesn't matter. It'll just install it using the native method to install. But it says that this has to be installed before the file. So the file cannot go first. So Puppet will evaluate this, and then it'll run in this order. It'll start down here at OpenSSH Server. It'll then go up the top here and do the config file, and then it will do the service, because that's the order it has to run in. There are a couple of different options when you run Puppet. You can tell Puppet to run in what we call optimized mode, which is where you let Puppet decide the most efficient way to run code where you haven't declared a dependency. So if you're installing lots of packages, you don't want to install one package and then sequentially install the next and then the next. You just want to install them all at once and let them all run the install at the same time, all finish, and then you're done. A lot of people complained about that. That was the default for Puppet for 8-9 years. And a lot of people complained because they like to know the order things are going to happen in. And if Puppet chooses the order, they don't know. So we switched to doing top-down unless you specify otherwise. There's also a new one we've added, which is called random, where it'll just run randomly. It's what I like to call the Netflix model. We trust our system. We know our code is good. We can run it randomly because it does not matter. It cannot break. That's why you run it randomly. I don't know of anyone that does run it randomly, but I know a lot of people that aspire to run it randomly. So I was talking yesterday at the DevOps meetup in Perth. It was hosted by Bank West. They're a Puppet user. And I told them about the random one, and they went, oh, we'd love to be there. They're not, but they'd love to be there. So, last thing I want to show is an orchestration tool that we have. So when I opened up firewall ports before for Puppet, one of the ports I opened was for mCollective, which is an ActiveMQ message bus that all of the agents subscribe to. So every Puppet system subscribes to this message bus, whether it's a Windows system or a Unix system. Actually, I'll do it. No, I'll do it here. Message bus, the broker sits on the Puppet master, and by default, only the Puppet master can put messages on it. And you can use the bus to interrogate systems. So if you wanted, for example, to find out how many people, how many systems had an updated version of a package, you could just put this message out and all the systems would report back in real time the current status of that package. So it's not querying a database, it's not looking at a CMDB that no one's updated since you first installed the machine, it's actually real time. So first, I can just test to see that there are systems online. I've got 2 systems online. Actually, I might just quickly spin up a third. Oh wait, I haven't snapped these. So you noticed I was using Vagrant before. Did you know Vagrant support regular expressions? So you don't have to type out the full host name? This has saved me hours of typing. No virtual machines match that regular expression, unless I get the regular expression wrong. Ah. Because I've updated the system. Nope. This is why I don't do regular expressions in demos. I never get them right, even the simple ones. Oh, they're just called 6 and 7 now. One of my colleagues writes these. I don't actually write the demo code, so okay, 6B. So one of the things you can do with this is you can query packages. And does anyone here manage any Unix systems? Excellent. Linux? Yeah, Linux, Unix, yeah, Red Hat. How's your patching going for glibc, for the Ghost? Ghost, was that glibc? Yeah. I saw a smirk and you looked away. Mostly? What about Shell Shock? I mean, that's been out for months. Yeah, done? Mostly? I haven't checked everything. I think it's done. I'm not going to look just in case. Like I've got Chinese food containers in my fridge that are like that. I'm just not going to look. So MCO, because it does real time, you can find out stuff in real time. So, MCO package status glibc. It puts the message on the bus. Oh, good, I've got 3 systems up now, and it gets a response back pretty much straight away. 3 systems, 300 systems, doesn't matter. Would have come back almost as fast. The only thing that ever slows it down is Windows systems when they actually have to do a lookup in their add remove programs for something, but usually they don't. So I can see straight away what version of glibc is on all my boxes. And I can identify which ones, and I could easily just put this into a Word document, search for which ones are out of date, and then compile a list of the ones I need to patch. And then when I need to patch them all, I can come back here and I can just go update glibc, enter. And all of my systems, Red Hat, Debian, SUSE, Solaris, AIX, will all update glibc using their native package tool and then report back and tell me they're done. And then I can run my status again and just check. Pretty nifty. Yeah, this is usually the point in any sales demo where my sales guy just sort of reaches into his bag and gets the purchase order ready just to hand over to me. I know you're going to sign now. It works just as well on Windows. I just can never remember the names of any of the Windows things that are on there because they're far too long and they have spaces. You can also filter. So you can filter out you can filter on facts. So you can filter by operating system. So you can say on all my Windows 2012 boxes that are running SQL Server, what version of this package have you got installed? Or what configuration have you got in this file? And you can write your own plugins so you can extend it to check pretty much anything. And it's really, really fast. So it's really useful. It's really simple. It comes back in plain text. And then you can use that text for generating reports. And I think that's probably about it for now. Like I said, we've got a new version coming out in a couple of weeks. We will probably have the Azure appliance ready. Let's go Christmas. Probably by June, I imagine. It usually falls a couple of weeks after the release of the updated version. It will require a lot less of digging around in here. It'll be set up so that basically you'll have to log in once to tell it where your Git repository is or your where you want to pull your code from. So at the moment we work with Git and we work with Subversion. I've got a customer that uses Team Foundation Server, and they have an application that sits in front of it and pretends to be Git. So Puppet talks to the application and it proxies it and sends it. And they're happy with it, but mileage might vary. We will be adding more in the future. So if it's something that you want to see, definitely let me know, because then I can let the engineers know. They're not going to build features if no one asks. And if any of you happen to not be busy next Thursday, we've got an event in Sydney, Puppet Camp, which is a one-day conference pretty much entirely hosted by community members talking about stuff they've done with Puppet. We'll have presentations from Health Direct, which is a government organization. They run in another large cloud hosting provider, but they run entirely a Windows environment. Linux, the only Linux server they have is their Puppet Master. We also have JN Solutions, who will also be talking about Puppet and Windows stuff. So there's some really interesting things you can find out from people that do a lot more of it every day than I do. If you want information on it, just come and hit me up, or just Google search for Puppet Camp Sydney and you'll find it. I mean, Bing search for Puppet Camp Sydney and you'll find it. And I will be around for a while, so feel free to ask questions if you need to.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Just going to check to see if anyone's asked any Q&A questions on here.
And of course, I'll take questions now if anyone wants to shout at me.
You had Meetup before?
Yes.
Can you use add window to PowerShell commands?
You can execute any PowerShell command you want. So you can actually so there's a module written by us for running any arbitrary PowerShell command. What a lot of Windows shops do when they bring Puppet in to manage their systems is they start by basically having Puppet just executing their own PowerShell scripts, and then they rewrite them
to be more like this, where you've got a command that is run, and that's a PowerShell command. It tells it to run it in PowerShell, and you can wrap it in some Puppet smarts to decide whether or not to run it. So one thing I forgot to mention, which is probably the most important thing to mention, Puppet is idempotent, so it will not repeat itself. And if you're installing a package, Puppet won't install it every time Puppet runs. Unlike a script that will install it every time it runs. Puppet will look, it'll go, oh, it's already installed, don't need to do it. So a lot of people use that idempotency, and first thing they do is they just wrap their own PowerShell scripts, and then they modify their PowerShell scripts like this, and then eventually they move to a model more like the open table guys, who publish modules on the Forge, but all of their modules, if you go and have a look at their code, it's basically just Puppet calling PowerShell to do stuff. Now, you can use WMIC, you can use DISM, but if you want to just run PowerShell, you can just run PowerShell. The important thing is to write your PowerShell in such a way that you try and maintain that idempotency, because a lot of the code to begin with, when people do this, the code is not idempotent. It execs every time, or if it it'll run every time and fail after the first time, which is even worse. But if we have a look at like the manage app pull code here, there's a bit of Puppet code there. So there's this is Puppet code, but then it just uses PowerShell modules to actually do the work.
So have you found any companies that move from, say, DSC custom modules to Puppet?
Yeah, we have a couple. We had a customer, especially customers that have mixed environments, because it's a lot easier to convince the Windows team to use Puppet than it is to convince the Linux team to use anything that starts with the words Microsoft. We had one customer who was writing Puppet code. The Unix admin was writing Puppet code, and the Windows admin walked past his desk. He stopped and he looked and went, "Why are you writing DSC?" "I'm not writing DSC, I'm writing Puppet." The Windows admin looked and looked. They look exactly the same. The only comment I'm going to make on that is the fact that Redmond, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, pretty close together. We've just brought out, we announced it comes out next week with any version, a DSC module, so you can actually plug directly into your existing DSC. The biggest thing we found is not that many people use DSC yet. The same as like before when I asked about PowerShell, just not that many people are doing it, but it's becoming more prevalent as more people are moving to platforms like Azure and more cloud orientated. You can't manage that by logging into an RDP session and clicking through a bunch of screens. Any other questions?
You just have a single Puppet master. What happens if that goes down?
All your systems still work. You just can't change it. So this is built on one Puppet master, and the general idea is, it's for people experimenting and getting used to it, or doing small environments. You can scale out your Puppet environment and sit it behind a load balancer. We've done some really, really elaborate designs for banks and organizations like that. Everybody's idea of HA and scalability is different, so we don't prescribe anything, but pretty much you can separate all the components and you can sit stuff behind load balancers. Almost everything is a HTTP API, so it's pretty low bandwidth and it's pretty easy to scale out across multiple systems, and any load balancer can manage it.
Cool. You can also install the Puppet agent. It's one of the default options when you stand up a VM in Azure. So I'm not sure if you demoed that.
I did.
In the other room. Okay, yeah. Cool. Yep.
And you can tell it your Puppet master, and you can tell it a Puppet master that's not on Azure. So we have customers that will have a Puppet master on premise, and all of their crowd stuff talks back to the Puppet master on premise. We have customers that do it the other way around. Depends on how long it takes for them to get a VM when they want it. We have customers that take 6 weeks or 9 months to get a new machine. So they just go to Amazon with their credit card and they spin up a Puppet master and start managing everything with that.
Cool. So any other questions for Patrick before we wrap up for this evening? I'm sure Patrick will be around for a little bit after the session if you've got any questions for him.
The fridge is still half full.
Yeah, absolutely. Any questions about Azure, Meetup, the events that we talked about coming up next week or in June? Everyone just wants to make a move, get out of here, have another beer. Great. Okay. Well, thanks a lot for the guys who attended online. As I said, this will be available on demand on our YouTube channel. You'll be able to follow this. There was a portion of the broadcast tonight where we had 2 mics going, so there's an echo, probably for about, sorry Patrick, for about the first 5-10 minutes of, probably first 5 minutes of Patrick's talking when we fixed it. But thanks a lot for coming along, guys, and if the video works.
The
we'll
first 5 or 10 minutes is also my standard demo, so you can actually, if you just go to PuppetRoute's website and look for a PE demo, we have heaps of them recorded. We do a new one every time we do a new version. So the first 10-15 minutes of this, you can watch it again with a lot more preparation and a lot more sleep behind the demo.
All right, guys, thank you very much. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks a lot for coming.